this is causing a huge issue in a lot of cities. So I want to talk about that a little bit, the effect that short-term rentals are having on skyrocketing rents in major cities, and really, and this is throughout the world. This is not, just a United States issue. And then I wanted to talk about the racial component as well, because there's been research done and tons of articles done about racial disparities in Airbnb bookings. People's Voice. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the People's Voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, we thank everyone who has taken the time to listen to the podcast today. We understand that you could be doing something else with your time today, so we appreciate you taking the time to check us out. As always, if this information is enlightening and you feel that it is worth sharing, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast. We're available on all podcast platforms, the People's Voice Podcast. And then you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is my YouTube channel, which is Trey Evans. And we post a video every Friday at 3 p.m. if you would like to watch the podcast. So thank you. And we appreciate you again for taking the time. So today I want to get into Airbnb. We are at the travel season. I guess for those who travel, during the summer months, I am personally not what they call a peak season traveler. I prefer to travel off peak because I don't like dealing with crowds. I don't. Call me antisocial, call me whatever you want. I travel in March and October when it's just better time for me to travel. So, but we're upon travel season, and so a lot of people will be traveling and they'll be staying at various sites in cities and countries, and wherever they stay, pretty much around the world, there is an Airbnb. And I'm specifically using Airbnb. This is not an attack on Airbnb, but Airbnb is the largest of the short-term rental companies. And so, it's almost become like a phrase, it's, even though, I could say short-term rentals, but some people may not totally grasp that concept. So that's why I'm using Airbnb, but we know that there are other short-term rental companies out there, but for association purposes, I'm going to use Airbnb. But this is not an attack on Airbnb, but I will expose some things about Airbnbs that you may not know, and not specifically just to the company, but to people who utilize Airbnbs in their profit gaining objectives. So Airbnbs. And let me kind of give the reason why I'm talking about this is I was recently talking to a friend of mine, and sorry about moving that chair up like that. He was recently telling me about his stay at an Airbnb, and he was, I won't say what city he was in. Should I say? No, I don't want to say what city he was in. But he was staying in a city and decided to use an Airbnb, right? And he had some caution about staying at a particular Airbnb because he was familiar with the neighborhood, which brought it to my attention because I did not realize, because just full disclosure, when I travel, I don't stay at Airbnbs. I'm just, that's just me. I staying in someone else's house and or apartment. That's just not for me, right? I know people will say, well, you stay at a hotel and people sleep, but other people sleep. I got that. Just for me, I'm not pulling up to nobody's house. That's just me. So, but going back, so he was telling me that he was staying at an Airbnb. It was kind of in a sketchy neighborhood, but I was, shocked to even know that, Airbnbs are that prolific now that they can be in anywhere. Like, I originally imagined that Airbnbs would be like in your typical vacation spots, right? You go to a big city or you want to stay near the beach, you're down in Miami or maybe out in LA, Chi-Town, you would be downtown, stuff like that. I didn't realize that you could just have an Airbnb in the middle of the hood. Now, again, this is not an indictment in those neighborhoods. I'm just saying I was not aware of that. So, anyway, I'm rambling. The reason why I'm now talking about Airbnbs is because of that conversation. And for the most part, he said it was a good stay. He wanted to be kind of in the middle of the city he was in, and he was in the middle of it. So with that, I started doing some research on Airbnbs, and I learned a couple of things. Number one, there are some horror stories out there regarding Airbnbs. Not just horror stories from locations of where some of these Airbnbs are at, but there's stories out there about the guest experience. Going to certain Airbnbs and having a terrible experience. There's stories out there about host. That's what they call them, host. These are the people that own the homes or the apartments that they're renting. There's horror stories about host having a difficult time with guests and damages that have been caused. So today I want to talk about Airbnbs, and I really want to focus on two things with Airbnbs. Number one, the effect that Airbnbs are having on rents in many cities. And this is a huge topic because there's been a lot of conversation about lack of housing inventory, and also there's been a huge increase in homelessness in major cities, and I'll talk about that on another podcast. But a lot of this is because landlords are using, or owners are using, rental properties that were once designated for people to live in. They're utilizing them for short-term rentals. And when you do that, it causes an issue because now those who actually need a place to stay don't have the place to stay anymore because they can't afford the short-term rental fees, right? Because one of the benefits, or if you want to call it that, one of the one of the effects of having an Airbnb or a short-term rental is that you can charge more for the property that you are renting. So if someone has a apartment and they want to rent an apartment to you, if you stayed there for 12 months, typical lease, or 24 months, whatever the lease is, then you pay your monthly rent until that lease is up, and then you decide to stay, or you can negotiate a new lease however you want to do it. Short-term rentals, they can charge, sometimes 2-3 times the amount, and they can charge multiple people, right? So you're constantly every day getting a new, or every week, however, or every month, however you rent your Airbnb for those who own them, you're getting a multiplier of income. And so and I've always been very clear on this podcast. I'm not against. I'm a capitalist, and you know have my means of generating income as well. So I get it, but this is causing a huge issue in a lot of cities. So I want to talk about that a little bit. The effect that short-term rentals are having on skyrocketing rents in major cities, and really, and this is throughout the world. This is not just a United States issue. And then I wanted to talk about the racial component as well, because there's been research done and tons of articles done about racial disparities in Airbnb bookings. And this has been on both sides. This has been, hosts that own Airbnbs or rent Airbnbs. There's been racial disparities in terms of the amount of bookings that certain groups can receive and the amount of money that they receive for each booking. And then there's been some racial disparities or racial discrimination, I should say, on, guests who try to book Airbnb. So I want to focus on kind of those two, the short-term rental effect and also the racial discrimination. So let me first go to the racial discrimination. Let's talk about that first. So back in 2016, Airbnb was basically hit, or not hit, but basically, well, yeah, they were. They were sued. Airbnb was sued back in 2016. And one of the reasons why they were sued was because a Harvard study had come out that basically said, guests who had African American sounding names were less likely to rent or be able to book a Airbnb. And I'm reading here from an article from CNN Business who kind of talked about this. And so, from that study, then Airbnb decided to do research in regards to, hey, let's uncover what's going on here. So they put together a project called the Project Lighthouse. They launched this back in 2020, and what the purpose of this project was to collect data on racial discrepancies within Airbnb, and it really focused on bookings in terms of the percentage of bookings between different races, and then also what the how this was affecting, or how racial discrepancy was affecting hosts that own Airbnb. So they did it kind of on a two-part study, and this was a result. Again, first this study came out in 2015 from Harvard Business, and then also in 2019 there was a lawsuit that was placed against Airbnb, and this was from several Black women that were in Oregon, and basically they alleged that they were being discriminated against based on their race when they were trying to book Airbnb. And a lot of this was caused because at one time, Airbnb, when you needed to book an Airbnb, and again, I'm not talking from experience, I'm talking about from all the things that I just read. At one time at Airbnb, when you wanted to book, your picture would come up, right? And basically, a host could say yay or nay on whether or not they wanted to rent to you. And as you know, there is racism in all aspects of business, life in general. And so that easily could become racial, or was racial discrimination, because if I'm somebody who doesn't want a certain individual to rent from my apartment or my house, my property, then I can just look at them and say, oh no, I don't want them here, and click and then go on to the next person. So that was the reason why this was launched. This Project Lighthouse was launched by Airbnb. They did this study and they came out back with some percentages to identify. And they have, and to Airbnb's credit, they made some changes. So, one of the big changes that they made in their booking process is that you can't see the person's picture until after they confirm the booking. So, from that aspect, it did somewhat of, being able to curb some of the discrimination. But I at least give them credit for that they did take a little bit of a opportunity to try to change that. So what were the results from this Project Lighthouse? And I'm not going to go through the whole report, and Airbnb has this report on their site if you are interested in looking at it. But basically what it came down to is that they did find that there was huge discrepancies in terms of, I don't want to say huge, but there was discrepancies regarding bookings between different individuals of color. So here from their report, and I'm reading from their report, it says Airbnb found a notable gap in user experiences. Users who were perceived to be white, okay, had a booking success rate of 94%. And this was compared to users who were black, who only had a success rate of 91%. So there's clearly evidence there that there's racial discrimination in Airbnb. Now, you would think, somebody's trying to make money. Why would, why, right? But like I just stated just a few minutes ago, there is racism in all aspects of life, whether it's business, education, it goes, healthcare, it goes on and on and on. But that was kind of the highlight of what was from the project. There's a whole other bunch of numbers, and I didn't want to get into that today. Again, the report is available on Airbnb site, and of course, I'll post it in my links when I post the video. But so there is an identifiable problem there. There's racial discrimination in Airbnbs. Okay, and Airbnb has taken a lot of different steps to try to curb this, so I want to give them credit. But this still exists. Okay, so that's the racial part of it. Now, short-term rentals and the effect short-term rentals are having. So as I stated earlier, short-term rentals force markets to, or have forced markets to increase rents or rent has been increased because now people find out that they can make tons of money by, offering 7-day rentals, 14-day rentals, 30-day rentals. Instead of locking somebody in for 12 to 24 months, you can triple your money in a year just by doing a short-term rental. And this is causing a huge impact across the country. I'm reading an article here from NBC 10 in Boston, and it noted that there was a huge problem not only in Boston but across the country. And I'm reading here from an article. It says that in big cities such as New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, although they have laws on their books regarding short-term rentals, because in a lot of these cities you can only have one short-term rental as an owner. Like you can't monopolize and have multiple ownerships. But even though they have these type of laws in these cities, it's still showing that short-term rentals are having a huge impact on a lot of the rents, is the reason the rents are skyrocketing in a lot of these cities. It also mentions here that since 2019, the number of short-term rentals in Dallas increased 56%. And of course, again, when you start to dig a little bit deeper, you start to go to a lot of these centers that are dealing with homelessness, right? Because literally, and I'm going to do that in another podcast, there are cities across the United States that homelessness is exploding. because of the lack of inventory that is available to rent. And then also you have the increase in rents, especially post pandemic, that people just can't afford. And a lot of this is being caused by short term rentals. I also saw this story in Austin, Texas, East Austin, Texas, and this is kind of a great example of what's happening in the market. So in Austin, Texas, in East Austin, Texas, there's a historically black neighborhood that has been inundated with Airbnbs. Right, a company has come in, a company called Urban Stay, and they are buying up properties in historically under marginalized black neighborhoods. And they're buying these properties, destroying them, and then building them back up and renting them out for Airbnbs. Okay, again, the capitalist side of me says, well, hey, it's just business. Business is business. But here's the problem. It's causing a different type of gentrification in that area, right? Because now you're pushing out those who have lived in those neighborhoods for decades. Not only that, in a lot of these neighborhoods, especially in this specific neighborhood, it's a historically, it's been designated as an historically black neighborhood, or it's a historic neighborhood, I should say. And because of that, it benefits from certain tax breaks. But now that you have these companies coming in doing Airbnbs, they're getting not only the tax breaks, but they're also getting the rental income, and they're pushing out the residents. And this is, again, occurring across the country. And this is just one example. I'm reading here from Texas Monthly. They did a great article on the challenges that's going on in historic Austin, East Austin, Texas, where Airbnb company has come in and bought a ton of property. And, again, I want to be clear. So I understand from a business perspective. I completely understand that. But there has to be, with all things, there has to be balance. And at what point does that balance include thinking about the people and how it's affecting the people? So what can be done? Well, let's not only be able to, I think that one of the first things that has to be done is that, number one, there has to be a cutoff in terms of the amount of properties that can be short-term rentals, right? If you have an even balance of short-term rentals and your general rentals or your traditional rentals, I think that first helps. Secondly, has to be more legislation. Although New York City, San Francisco, and Los Angeles have laws, on the books that you can only own one Airbnb, not all cities are like that, and the majority are not. So there has to be additional regulation. And then number three, there has to be enforcement of that regulation, right? It has to be penalties against property owners who have multiple, or companies that have multiple or monopoly on short-term rentals in a particular city. That way you'll cut down on a lot of the pressure that is being caused from short-term rentals that's causing the high increase in skyrocketing rents throughout the country, and is creating an additional amount of pressure in the creation of expanding homeless and having new people being introduced to houselessness, not homeless, but houselessness. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk about the short-term rental, the Airbnb situation. Again, the purpose of this podcast is to kind of just bring the information. Again, not many stories done about it. A couple of blips earlier this year. A lot of it was from, during the pandemic, but it kind of just went away. I just want to put it back on the radar. And again, as always, if this information is enlightening and you feel like it's worth sharing, please feel free to reach out to me on our social media. You can leave a comment. I am at I am Trey Evans on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can also reach us at the People's Voice Podcast on Instagram, and you can also reach me at Trey Evans on LinkedIn. Trey Evans on LinkedIn. So as always, we appreciate your time today. Dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute.
I am Trey Evans.
People's Voice.